Some people don't have the courage to face the end. They prefer to vanish. From one day to the next, they stop replying, change their tone, grow cold, ignore you, until you realize alone that you were discarded. And the most shocking part, they do it naturally, as if you meant nothing. There's no fight, no closure, no dignity, just silence. A cold, calculated silence that cuts deeper than any word. And in that silence, a new kind of pain is born. Not the pain of losing someone, but the pain of realizing you were erased without a trace of guilt. Psychology calls this a silent discard, a type of emotional abandonment where someone walks out of your life without ever looking back. But what no one tells you is that there's a response that doesn't require shouting or confrontation, a response that destroys from the inside. And that response is your disappearance. Yes, your vanishing can be the turning point. Not a theatrical vanishing meant to draw attention, but a strategic absence. A conscious decision to walk away without warning, without explanation, without leaving traces. Because what truly destabilizes someone who discarded you is realizing you're no longer there when they finally look back. This video isn't about revenge. It's about emotional control, about how you can turn abandonment into silent power, and how calm detachment, when born from emotional maturity, becomes the cruelest punishment for those who thought you'd always be there, begging for crumbs. You no longer have to prove anything, because true impact doesn't come from long speeches. It comes from absence, from unpredictability, from that heavy silence that doesn't justify itself, doesn't beg to be understood, and for that very reason makes the other person fall apart. While they were at peace with their ego, you were drowning in silent pain. While they were playing games, you were fighting the emotional confusion of someone who didn't even get a goodbye. But now, the game has changed. And the one who left without a word will have to face the void they created, because no one is ready to lose access to something they took for granted. When you stop replying, stop showing up, stop giving, something in them begins to collapse. It's not love, it's the loss of control, it's ego collapse. In this video, you'll understand why your inaccessible presence hurts more than total absence. Because you're still in sight, but no longer reachable. Because you still exist, but you're no longer emotionally available. And that drives them insane. Because this kind of absence is where real power lives. Not the kind that begs for pity, but the kind that exudes strength. The kind that doesn't return, doesn't explain, doesn't ask for another chance. Here you'll learn how to turn unexplained abandonment into fuel. How to stop seeking answers and become the answer. How to use silence not as an escape, but as a mirror that shows everything the other person failed to see while there was still time. You'll understand what happens when you vanish and never come back. When you ignore not out of pride but out of self-respect. When your emotional absence becomes your structure. And what once felt like loss reveals itself as your greatest opportunity for rebirth. You'll learn the power of unpredictability, of not answering a provocation, of giving no signs of weakness, of disappearing without a trace. Because emotional chaos only survives where it finds a crack, and your calm might be the final blow. If they discarded you without saying a word, and that's fine. Now it's your turn to say nothing. Just disappear, and calmly watch the collapse unfold. Because those who ignore eventually beg, and those who underestimate eventually fall to their knees. And when that day comes, you won't have to do a thing, because your silence will already have done the work. No one expects to be suddenly discarded. Especially not by someone who, until yesterday, acted like everything was fine. When a connection breaks without a word, without an explanation, without even a look to signal the reason, it's not just the bond that shatters. It's your entire reality that cracks in silence. What destroys you first isn't the absence itself. It's the calm coldness with which the other person disappears. It's the tone of normalcy that hurts more than any scream. Your heart asks, was it even real? But the only answer is emptiness, a void that weighs on you, that screams, even without sound. The strategic absence, when chosen by the one who leaves, triggers the first ego collapse in the one left behind. Because silence doesn't come with instructions, it doesn't come with a warning. It comes with unexplained abandonment and a suffocating feeling of worthlessness that takes over everything. It's like someone turns off the lights in a room you're still in. You blink, searching for a presence, a sign, but all you find is emotional darkness, and in that darkness a silent pain is born, the kind that eats you from the inside because no one validates it, not even the one who caused it. Those who go through this kind of emotional rupture begin to doubt their own memory. Did I overreact? Did I imagine that connection? This emotional unpredictability leaves scars, invisible but deep, because the brain craves logic, but powerful silence offers none, just weight, just definitive absence. And that's exactly where the cruelest battle begins, trying to understand what will never be explained, looking for signs that don't exist, replaying every conversation, every message, trying to reconstruct the exact moment of the silent discard. And the more you try, the more confused you feel. This kind of transformative absence, although devastating at first, often becomes the gateway to internal reconstruction. But before that, there is mourning. A mourning with no body, no funeral, no rituals, as if you were grieving someone who's still alive, but no longer inhabits the same emotional space. The purposeful disappearance by the one who discards is, in many cases, a mirror, a reflection of their own emotional incapacity. But the one left behind doesn't see that right away. The first instinct is always internal. I wasn't enough, and that thought eats away. It's a silent poison. The emotional blockage that follows is a natural defense. A person shuts down not by choice but by necessity, because the invisible impact of an unexplained absence is not easy to absorb. And those who have experienced it know, some days the mind gets lost in a maze. In those moments, the calculated indifference of the one who walked away becomes a ghost, not the kind that scares, but the kind that lingers. A haunting reminder that you were left without the right to understand, to process, to conclude. It wounds your sense of identity. It hurts your self-worth. Emotional maturity is not expected from those in pain. It's built slowly through it, and the pain of being abandoned without explanation is a very specific kind of torment. A cycle of unanswered questions, of trying to rationalize the irrational, of searching for logic where all you find is a wounded ego. In this kind of endgame, you don't just lose the person. You lose your ground, your narrative. Your entire reality needs to be rewritten without the main characters. And that demands an enormous emotional effort, a process that feels unfair, because you never chose to play this game. The inaccessible presence of the one who left turns into obsession, not out of love but disorientation. The mind tries to access something that's been blocked. And the more it tries, the more it drains itself. It's like banging on a locked door, until you realize it's not the door, it's the path. Self-respect begins to emerge the moment you stop trying to walk that path. When you understand that the heavy silence they left behind doesn't require answers, it requires healing, and that healing won't come from them. It comes from the intentional distance you choose for yourself. Someone who suffers from this kind of silent discard goes through layers of understanding. First comes the pain, then the shock, then the anger, then the emptiness, and only later comes clarity. And with clarity, emotional detachment. But until that point, every step feels like walking through a minefield of memories. That clarity marks the beginning of the turning point, because what used to be pain becomes discernment, what used to be obsession becomes self-care, and what used to be a search becomes a pause to rebuild, to breathe, to understand that their absence wasn't your fault. It was their choice. And that's where another process begins, one less emotional, more strategic. Because when you stop chasing someone who hides, when you accept that the absence won't be explained, the real power of silence begins. And that power, it shakes people. There comes a moment when pain turns into clarity, when, after so much searching for explanations, you realize that asking only deepens the wound. That's where the shift happens. You stop chasing, you stop trying to understand. You simply don't stop. The silence that once suffocated now becomes shelter. What once felt like abandonment now becomes absence with purpose. The difference lies in the choice, And when it's you who chooses intentional distance, everything changes. Even the energy shifts. Strategic absence is not revenge, it's not a game, it's emotional protection. A silent shield against further confusion, against the reopening of wounds. Once you understand this, you also understand that disappearing isn't vanishing. It's making room to rebuild what was broken inside. Instead of using silence to provoke, you start using it to preserve. You learn that being emotionally inaccessible isn't arrogance, it's discernment. You're no longer available to be hurt again. And that boundary, even when unspoken, commands respect. A respect no one ever demanded on your behalf. Calm detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the opposite of reactivity. You no longer reply to mixed messages, no longer retaliate to provocations, no longer accept emotional crumbs. You've learned that a silent response speaks louder than any speech, because it doesn't explain itself, it positions itself. And the most powerful part, you don't have to say, "It's over," because your absence says it, your firmness says it, and your powerful silence echoes louder than any scream. They feel it, not because you shouted, but because you didn't return. And that hurts more than any word, that silent pain. It's no longer yours, it's theirs. Because the game has changed. What was once a cycle of expectations and reactions is now a landscape of unpredictability. And the wounded ego of someone who expected control now finds a minefield of calculated indifference. Those who were used to your predictability don't know what to do with your new posture. Before you explained, justified, insisted. Now you disappear, with dignity intact, with emotional control. And that shift in pattern doesn't just surprise, it terrifies. You stop being reactive, you become strategic. You stop being available, you become selective. And in this process, you begin to reclaim something you had abandoned long ago, self-respect. And when that returns, it returns with force, with roots, with presence. The absence that weighs now is not punishment, it's reflection. A reflection of what you've decided not to tolerate anymore. Those who vanished from your life without explanation now feel the weight of not having access to you anymore, not because you blocked them, but because you evolved. And that cannot be undone. A good example of this, when someone stops replying to the messages they used to anxiously wait for, not out of anger, but out of clarity. That internal shift, that emotional maturity, shows up in subtle gestures, muting notifications, uninstalling apps, choosing not to expose yourself. They are small actions, but they mark the beginning of inner reconstruction, a new kind of presence. One that no longer needs to be validated by outside attention, by likes, by responses. Because now peace is your validation. And that peace is transformative absence. Absence doesn't have to be dramatic. It just needs to be solid, consistent. Because when you decide not to return, even when you could, even when there are emotional hooks, you create something rare, invisible impact. A force that doesn't assert itself with words, but with definitive absence. The decision to stop chasing, to stop reaching out, is not surrender. It's emotional intelligence. And that changes everything. Because once you stop feeding the cycle dies. The end of the game doesn't need an audience, just silence that carries weight. That decision can be as simple as not replying to a "Hey stranger," as powerful as refusing to fall into the same loop, and as freeing as realizing you no longer need to prove anything. Silence already proved everything, and it keeps proving it day by day. From this point on, a new version of you is born. Not the one who tries to understand others, but the one who begins to understand themselves, who learns that the greatest respect doesn't come from others. It comes from within, and the greatest response is the silence of someone who chose not to keep getting hurt. But the most fascinating part of this silent choice is what it begins to trigger on the other side. Because what was once control and now becomes loss of command, and when they realize they can no longer reach you, that's when their ego begins to collapse. Absence begins as silence, but over time, it becomes a mystery. Before, they knew exactly what to expect from you. A quick reply, heightened emotion, a willingness to reconnect. Now, nothing. No reaction, no explanation, no return. And that breaks them. What bothers them the most is not the distance itself. It's the disruption of the emotional routine. The script that once worked, "I'll disappear and they'll come running," no longer works. What was once control becomes an ego collapse. Because the psychological game lost its main player, you've become unpredictable, and for someone who thrives on control, that is unbearable. Emotional absence begins to erode their sense of certainty. With each day that passes without your reaction, they begin to question not just your silence, but their own worth, and the despair is silent. The wounded ego begins to bleed from within. It once fed on your constant presence, now it doesn't know how to reach you, and that creates growing discomfort. Because the inaccessible presence of someone who was once available has the power to become an obsession, the calm detachment you show is confusing. Are they okay? Do they still care? These questions repeat endlessly in the mind of someone who underestimated you. And the most ironic part? The more you stay silent, the louder it becomes inside them. That's the effect of powerful silence. You don't make a scene, you don't beg, you don't confront, you just disappear. And that purposeful vanishing doesn't bring them relief, it brings panic, because it suggests that maybe you've moved on, that maybe you're no longer emotionally tied, and that idea is unbearable for someone who craves power. At this stage, strategic absence becomes an invisible weapon, sharp, precise. Without attacking, you let their own mind create the punishment. Because the absence that hurts the most isn't measured in days, but in unanswered questions. And the one who once controlled, now questions everything. When you were predictable, you were controllable. Now you're a mystery. And that mystery awakens the deepest fear of any manipulator, loss of control. They begin to test you, drop hints, provoke, but you no longer take the bait, and that reveals the strength of your calculated indifference. Self-respect has become your boundary. Emotional maturity has become your filter. You're not absent out of pride. You're absent out of discernment, because you realize that insisting on someone who underestimated you would be a betrayal of yourself. And now your absence is proof of your growth. You see it in the small things. You read the message but don't reply. You're online but don't engage. You post something peaceful, no hidden messages, no drama, and it destabilizes them more than any outburst. Because it radiates serenity, and serenity commands. The emotional block that now exists between you isn't a punishment. It's a consequence. A direct result of all the times you were ignored, invalidated, or placed second, and now the one who did that feels the silent pain of their own poison, with nowhere to run. And that's where transformative absence is born, because your choice to walk away wasn't impulsive. It was built up over time, from exhaustion, from reaching your limit, and from a decision to protect your dignity, to preserve your peace. And they only realize what they lost when it's truly gone. The one who thought you'd always be there now feels the invisible impact of your departure. There's no more predictability, no pattern, no routine, just silence. And in that silence, every attempt to reach you fails, and every absence becomes a reminder. A reminder that emotional control is power, and that anyone who takes your presence for granted will one day beg for it when it becomes a permanent absence. But by then, it's too late, because you no longer want to return, because now you know your worth. This kind of absence doesn't vanish, it leaves a mark. It doesn't hurt, it teaches. And the one who underestimated you begins to realize they never truly knew you, because your strength was always hidden beneath your willingness to give. Now that you've stepped back, it finally shows. And when they realize the game is over, that there's no way to reach you, that your heavy silence wasn't just a phase, they try to recover what they let slip away, but time doesn't reverse. And you are no longer in the same emotional place, but the strongest reaction is yet to come. There's a pain sharper than complete absence, the pain of seeing someone still there, yet being emotionally untouchable. The unreachable presence creates exactly that. You're still within view, but no longer within reach, and that contrast shatters them. It's like looking at a painting you once could touch, but now it's behind thick glass. You observe it, recognize it, miss it, but you can't interact anymore. That silent barrier is what we call calm detachment. It doesn't wound with words, but with distance. An inaccessible presence commands more respect than complete disappearance, because it serves as a constant reminder of what was lost. You're still there, but no longer available, and that visible absence causes an ego collapse in the one who thought they'd always have you. It's fascinating how purposeful absence carries weight, because they can still see your steps, follow your movements, feel your energy, but everything has changed. The emotional connection has been severed. And now, no matter how hard they try, they can no longer get through the emotional barrier you've built. You've become a universe they no longer have access to, a territory that was once familiar, but now requires a different level of presence to enter, a level they never offered. And for those who don't know how to evolve, all that's left is to watch from a distance. And the cruelest part? You didn't make a scene, you didn't block them, you didn't disappear from the map, you simply chose intentional distance. You're still present, but your emotional absence is undeniable, and that awakens their desperation, because it's a form of abandonment, but visible. This kind of posture, though silent, speaks volumes. It shows that you no longer need to react, beg, or explain. You've become a stable and inaccessible presence. Predictability is gone. And now, you are unpredictable. With that, emotional control changes hands. The one who used to decide when to come close or pull away now can't decode your signals. The psychological game has turned to smoke, and all they're left with is an echo, the memory of access they once had and will never have again. This silence with weight isn't punishment, it's emotional maturity. Because you understood that there's no point being everywhere if you're not at peace. Your inner reconstruction doesn't need an audience, it needs focus. And those who don't contribute to your serenity lose the invitation. From the other side, this feels like a blow, because you didn't disappear, you became a mystery. A calm mystery without accusations, without resentment. Just silent presence, just calculated indifference. And this new posture is hard to interpret. An inaccessible presence is like a book everyone used to read, but now it's written in another language. The same pages, the same title. But no one understands the content anymore, because you've changed. And that hurts more than any final goodbye. Transformative absence reveals itself at that point, when you no longer need to cut every tie. All it takes is shifting your energy. Your silent response has become your new language, and those who can't hear that frequency get lost. This shift shows up in simple actions. You go to a place you once shared, but now you walk in with a different posture. You don't avoid, you don't fake anything, you don't dramatize, you're just there, whole, light, steady. And that weighs more than any jealous scene ever could. You've become someone who respects your own silence, who values your own space, who refuses to return to places you've outgrown. And that kind of posture, even without words, is an emotional punch to someone who thought they could control you. This kind of visible emotional absence becomes a mirror that reflects everything they lost and how little they valued it. Now they try to reach you again. They send messages like your posts try to provoke, but you don't move anymore. Predictability is a thing of the past, and the new version of you doesn't explain, doesn't translate, doesn't offer. You simply exist, and you exist with self-respect, with emotional protection, with boundaries that were once missing. But now they're there, and they're solid. They always think they can come back, that after the coldness, the silence, the omissions, you'll still be there, waiting, available, receptive. But what they don't realize is that while they were busy with their own ego, you were busy rebuilding yourself. Those who think they can come and go whenever they want underestimate the power of transformative absence. They believe you're still the same, but you're not. Silence has become emotional protection. Absence has become structure. And that old open door is now a solid wall. When they try to come back, they still do it with a sense of superiority. They say empty things like, "I missed you," or "I just needed some time." But you don't need shallow explanations anymore. You're no longer looking for closure. You already found the answer, the game is over, and that's when the real collapse begins. They never expected the silent rejection to come from you. That calm detachment would be on your side. That calculated indifference would be your ally. They were convinced you'd still miss them. But now, they're the ones who miss you. You don't respond with anger. You don't confront, you simply don't move. Your silent response is a verdict. There's no discussion, no space for negotiation. Emotional absence is now permanent, and that door, once open, is officially closed to visitors. This new version of you isn't a reaction, it's the result of a decision, one that took time, tears, sleepless nights, and inner battles. But now you no longer depend on what that person has to offer, and that silently shatters their ego. Because the ego, used to having control, doesn't know how to handle strategic absence. It begs for a reaction, and you don't give it. It tries to provoke, and you stay composed. It tries to understand, and all it finds is an inaccessible presence. They start testing, liking your photos, sending subtle messages, showing up by accident in your spaces. But now your emotional maturity speaks louder. You don't reply, you don't react, because you've learned, the one who disappears reveals who they are, and the one who returns thinking they're still in control has already lost. The silent pain that takes over someone who tried to return too late is corrosive because it finds no relief, no discussion, no stage, only silent rejection. And the worst part, it doesn't need to be announced, it's felt, and how deeply it's felt. The invisible impact of a firm emotional absence is unbearable for someone who lives off applause, validation, control. Because now there's no more performance, only the serene distance of someone who learned to stand alone without begging for affection. This pain grows not just from loss, but from humiliation. Their pride was crushed by something they never expected, your evolution. They may even try to guilt-trip you, to provoke regret, but all they find is the weight of your absence. And that destroys them because it's unexpected, it's unpredictable. You were always the one who stayed, but now you're gone. And what used to be certainty has become an abyss, a void they created themselves, and now can't fill. You, on the other hand, are at peace. Your inner reconstruction wasn't easy, but it was deep. And now you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Your silence speaks, your absence communicates, your posture commands, and whoever tries to come back faces this new, closed-off territory. They try, they insist, they send one last message just to test, but you're not the same anymore. And your answer is silence, a powerful silence, not born of pride, but of discernment, of self-respect, of emotional protection. This kind of absence doesn't scream, but it echoes. It breaks the psychological game. It dismantles the manipulator's performance, and it reveals the truth. You've learned. And when someone learns, they don't return to the same place, because they know going back would mean betraying their own dignity. Now they face ego collapse, alone, because the only audience they ever had, you, walked away, and the show is over. All that's left is for them to deal with the impact of losing someone who only ever wanted to be valued before leaving. There's no punishment more painful for someone who thrives on emotional chaos than the silence of someone who chose calm, because what they expect from you is an explosion, drama, emotional loss of control. But when they're met with serenity, something inside them breaks. You didn't block them. You didn't make a scene. You didn't leave a long goodbye text. You just disappeared emotionally. And that kind of purposeful vanishing is what hurts the most, because it carries a subtle force. It doesn't rip anything out all at once. It slowly empties everything. Strategic absence, when paired with calm detachment, becomes a mirror, an uncomfortable reflection. They try to provoke you, but you don't react. They try to test your emotional temperature, but find only neutrality. They try to shake your balance, but find only silence. And that heavy silence, but it hurts, because it says so much without saying a word. It communicates what you no longer intend to repeat. It screams that you're no longer there, that your emotional absence isn't neglect and it's a choice. And that dismantles anyone who lived off control. Your calm became a punishment, not out of cruelty, but consequence, because instead of playing the psychological game, you simply left the board. And now the one who was used to moving pieces around you has no idea what to do. And more, your absence wasn't sudden, it was gradual. a deliberate withdrawal built from small silences, delayed replies, glances that no longer sought permission, until one day you were simply no longer emotionally available. The one who underestimated you now faces the invisible impact of your new posture. That person who used to reply quickly, explain everything, cry easily, is gone. And in their place stands someone with emotional control, preserved dignity and emotional maturity. That's hard to handle, because this calm has no cracks, no gaps, no relapses. It's firm, solid, clean, and that's unsettling. Transformative absence stops being denial. It becomes an inaccessible presence, and inaccessible presence is emotional torture. They start testing the limits of your patience, sending messages just to see if you'll explode, trying to poke your wounds but you don't react. Not because you don't feel, but because you no longer sell yourself emotionally. Your emotional wall is now armor. The silent pain they begin to feel has no place to be shared, because those who survive on chaos don't know how to ask for help when faced with peace. They know how to generate reactions, but not how to deal with the absence of them. And every time you don't show up is a reminder. The person they used to control with a gesture, an emoji, or a vanishing act is now inaccessible. That is the real punishment, because it doesn't depend on force, it depends on stability. And stability is something they don't have. You, on the other hand, grow stronger with each drama-free day. You realize that true emotional authority is silent. And the firmer you become, the more they unravel, because now the chaos has nowhere left to latch onto. The unpredictability they once used against you now turns into their own reflection, because no one knows what you think, what you feel, or if you feel. And that constant doubt becomes ego collapse, because ego hates silence. It needs a stage, and you closed the curtains. Real-life examples of this happen all the time. The person who once ignored you now likes everything you post. Who used to disappear now shows up with empty phrases, trying to pull you back into the cycle. But you just observe, calm, unshaken. The emotional absence you now practice isn't fake superiority, it's real growth. You're not playing games, you're free, you're not retaliating. You're respecting yourself, and that posture unsettles more than any direct rejection, sometimes even more. Because while an argument allows for dialogue, silence doesn't allow for anything. And an inaccessible presence forces the other person to confront their own emotional bankruptcy, their complete unpreparedness to handle someone who no longer breaks over crumbs, who no longer chases. That calm doesn't need a performance. It just settles in, like a cold breeze entering a room that was too warm, and the one who fed off the heat of your emotion now shivers in the face of your calm detachment and realizes you are no longer available to chaos. That awareness is the deepest punishment. It wasn't you who walked away shouting. It was the other who lost someone who knew how to leave in silence. And now the strategic absence has become a constant presence in their mind, an echo, a reminder, a silent, you had it, and you didn't know how to value it. Serenity weighs more than any explosion, because it's consistent. And every attempt to provoke, to attract attention, to flip the game, fails. Because you've become a wall, an emotional wall, not out of coldness, but out of emotional protection. They feel it deeply, but they no longer have access. And that is unbearable. The most surprising part of strategic absence is that behind the silence, someone new is being born. Not someone cold, someone strong. Someone who went through unexplained abandonment, faced ego collapse, dove into silent pains and came back different. Different in everything. In your eyes, your movements, your energy. Because now you carry emotional maturity. The kind you don't get from books or motivational quotes, but from wounds. Scars that may be invisible, but tell the story of an inner reconstruction that happened in the dark. You didn't hide. You rebuilt yourself. You disappeared with purpose. You went into the cocoon, not to run away, but to evolve. And now you've come out, not with the same fragility, but with an inaccessible presence, an energy that doesn't beg, doesn't push, doesn't let itself be invaded. Those who look at you today don't understand. They expected the same pattern, the same anxious heart, but instead, they find someone with serenity in the chest and calculated indifference in the eyes, not because you turned to stone, but because you became untouchable. And that no one expected. The emotional game has been dismantled. The rules that once worked, disappearing to provoke, showing up to test, triggering jealousy to measure, are now useless because the main player left the board. And that makes every attempt pathetic. Your unpredictability now isn't a strategy, it's freedom. You owe no one answers, no longer need to please, and don't worry about being understood. Because you realized your peace is worth more than any validation from someone who once underestimated you. The emotional absence you now carry is your armor. Not because you don't feel anymore, but because you've learned not to lose yourself for someone who never knew how to find you. Self-respect became your priority, and those who don't respect simply don't get in. This new version of you doesn't scream, it vibrates. You don't show off, but it radiates, and the other person feels it, even from afar, that something has changed. Their attempt to return is swallowed by your heavy silence. Their provocation is met with your calm coldness, and their pride melts. You no longer seek explanations. You don't send long texts. You don't try to fix what was never solid, because you've learned that protecting your own energy matters more than rebuilding something with someone who doesn't know what care is. That's emotional protection. The transformative absence you chose to live has taken root, and now you no longer adapt to fragile relationships. Your presence has become demanding, and anyone who doesn't offer consistency, clarity, and truth stays outside. Simple as that. They try to find the old you, the one who gave in, who explained, who forgave easily. But that version of you is gone, and what was born in its place is untouchable, because it was forged in tears no one saw, and in decisions that came at a high cost. Examples of this shift appear in small details. Your schedule is full of new commitments, your expression is lighter, your circle more selective. You didn't isolate, you refined yourself, and now whoever wants to be close must earn it. The other person watches from afar, confused, bothered, because silence now isn't absence, it's elevated presence. And every ignored attempt to contact you, every failed control trick, every unanswered hi, is a reminder. You've become unreachable. And the most powerful part, there's no going back. Because the ego collapse you faced, the silent pain you endured, the strategic absence you built, all of it made you see that self-love isn't luxury, it's survival. And that no one can take from you. You no longer respond to pleas. You don't explain yourself to maintain ties. You don't beg for company. You've learned that preserved dignity is worth more than any affection that has to be begged for. And that, by itself, is a rebirth. Your emotional absence is now a code of conduct, a clear boundary. You're present but not easy to access. You're there, but you don't hand yourself over. You're calm but unbreakable. That's the strength of balanced coldness. It doesn't destroy, it protects. And those who don't understand that, lose. This new emotional territory you built no longer accepts unexpected visits, and those who try to invade find closed doors. Doors that were once open but now are guarded by awareness, by healing, by powerful silence. You became what they never expected, and now all that's left for them is to observe, to feel, to regret, because there's no path back. Only the inaccessible presence of someone who knew how to disappear at the right time and come back even stronger. In the end, it wasn't your scream that caused the impact. It was your silence. It wasn't confrontation that broke their ego. It was your strategic absence. The one that arrived quietly, without noise, without drama, but with the firmness of someone who knows they don't deserve to be treated as disposable. You didn't ask for explanations. You didn't chase. You didn't demand anything. You just left, with your dignity intact, with serene coldness, with emotional control. And that kind of departure is impossible to ignore, because it weighs, it echoes, it leaves a void that has no replacement, and now you are somewhere else, an emotional place that's completely inaccessible to those who once played with your presence, a place where self-respect is the only key, a place where silent pain has been recycled and transformed into inner structure, emotional maturity, and self-protection. While they're still trying to understand why you no longer react, you already understand everything. You understood that the end of the game begins the moment you stop responding. That unpredictability isn't a tactic, it's your new nature. That not being present is sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself. And now I ask you, why would you insist on going back to someone who discarded you as if you were nothing? Why open a door again that only served to weaken you? Why keep searching for meaning in a silence that already told you everything? What this absence did to you, no one else can see, but you feel it, you know it. You've become more centered, more selective, more whole. You no longer need external answers, because now you live with an internal answer. You're calm. Yes, the same calm that was once mistaken for indifference is now your shield, because you've realized that emotional evolution is impossible while you're still begging for attention. And nothing destabilizes someone who underestimated you more than your peace. And if they try to come back, if they show up at your door with rehearsed speeches and regretful eyes, breathe. Remember everything you felt. The unexplained absence, the collapse you had to face alone. Remember that time does not heal what contact keeps reopening. You didn't walk away out of pride, you walked away out of clarity, because you realize not every bond is worth preserving. And that powerful silence is worth more than 1,000 arguments, because it communicates with precision what words could never express. Now you carry something that can't be bought, taught, or stolen: posture. And posture unsettles, posture intimidates, posture attracts. Because in a world where everyone is chasing answers, you decided to become the answer. One that doesn't need to explain itself. So before this video ends, I want to leave you with a few questions. Why are you still accepting less than you deserve if you already know your worth? What's keeping you from turning the page for good, even though you know there's nothing left there? Isn't your calm already the most powerful punishment you could ever deliver? And what if the absence that once hurt you is exactly what saved you? You no longer need permission to move on. You don't need an apology or a late message. What you need now is consistency. The same consistency that taught you to prioritize yourself, to stay quiet, and to disappear with purpose. If this video spoke to you, then it means you're already on that path. And if you're not yet, let this be the beginning of your emotional disappearance, of your inaccessible presence, of your silent shift. Because the one who discarded you without saying a word now has to learn to live with the emptiness you left behind. Subscribe to the channel right now. Here you'll learn how to become emotionally unshakable, how to use silence as a shield, and how to build an inner strength no one can ever control. Turn on the notification bell. Your next steps require awareness, and with every new video, you'll learn to take those steps with clarity and confidence. And if this message resonated with you, share it with someone who also needs to remember their worth, because silence can be the most powerful weapon of those who've decided to stop accepting crumbs. I'll see you in the next video. But until then, remember, your absence is what they fear the most.